Greetings all. Welcome back to the Coptimizer Podcast. We've got a special edition on the road show. I'm with Eric Doden in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Gubernatorial. Did I say that right? Oh my gosh.
That's a hard word to say. I try to avoid it at all costs.
Welcome to the show, Eric.
Thank you, Patrick.
I really appreciate you spending some of your valuable time with us and our audience. And we met a few months ago. We had some conversations around public safety, what's going on in public safety, not just in Indiana, but nationally. And I look forward to the opportunity to continuing that discussion with you here today.
Same here.
Should we wait? We didn't do any music. I didn't give any music. We should kick in with a little music, get ourselves fired up. Well, this is what happens when you take the show on the road, right? There's always new toys. There's always new things to learn.
I was going to remind you about the music, but I'm a rookie, so I didn't think I should say anything.
Well, that was cool. That at least gets us fired up and gets us in the mood. So before we get going, how about maybe just take a couple minutes to introduce yourself and let the audience know who you are and what you're up to.
Sure. I'm Eric Doden. I grew up in Butler, Indiana, town of 2,500 people. When I was 15, we moved to Auburn, a metropolis of 12,000 people. So I grew up in small towns. That was really formative for me, and that was a big part of my heritage and growing up. And then Maci and I met in law school at Valparaiso after going to Hillsdale College, and we married, and we celebrated 25 years of marriage this June. So somehow she has managed to put up with me.
Congratulations.
And then we have 5 children between the ages of 22 and 17, and we're officially empty nesters, which means I'm officially old. And so we're still trying to adjust the idea that we do not have kids at home here coming up. But we just very blessed. Have had a lot of fun in our marriage, and I'm just one of those lucky guys that married my best friend. So that's a little bit about us and who we are and what we've been up to. Well,
25 years for me as well this year. I hit 25 in April, so we've got that in common.
That's great.
I was definitely punching above my weight. I got really lucky. So,
well, I got a little offended when my dad said that you way outpunted your coverage. Usually it's just outpunted. Way outpunted your coverage. I thought it was a little excessive, but they are right, of course.
Yeah, parents generally know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And we usually figure that out later in life. I used to say, the older I got, the smarter my dad got.
Very true.
But in any case, so you come from a background in business, and you've done a lot of work with the state of Indiana. At one point, you were working on the Indiana Economic Development Commission. Did I say that correctly? Corporation. And you worked with former Governor Pence on that. And I think there's a lot of things around that would make for great discussion today. And when we're thinking about policing, when we're thinking about the future of policing. But before we get into all that, you're running for governor.
Yes.
That's kind of like a big deal.
Yes.
Why?
Well, I think for me it's important that Indiana has a bold vision, especially for our small towns. We've spent $1 billion a year in economic development for a long time, and we've never had a plan for the 2.3 million people that live in small towns. And so I think what inspired me to do this is a group of leaders that asked me to run and be engaged because they knew we had a vision for how we could transform communities around the state of Indiana, which is related to a lot of the topics we're going to discuss now. Because when you have distressed communities, you have distressed people. And so what we're really excited about is 3 things. Number 1, having vibrant communities around the state, and we have a plan to do that. Number 2, making sure that we protect the vulnerable, which is a lot of what our law enforcement community does. And then number 3, make sure that we have efficient, effective government that really serves people. And you're going to hear a lot about that in the next 10 months.
Well, that's great. And I have to agree with you on all points there. I think everybody knows that I'm a retired police chief and spent 30 years in policing. And it's interesting because one of the first things that you learn in the world of policing is it probably shouldn't be one of the first things that you learn, but you do learn that the apple does not fall far from the tree, and you can see crime, you can see generational crime in the families that you're dealing with. But as you get a closer and upfront and personal look at these issues, as a police officer does, you begin to see what causes that and where the roots of crime come from. And then you develop an appreciation and a frustration, I think, oftentimes about why can't we get ahead of this? Why can't we make investments at a very early time that can change the trajectory of a person's life, that can steer them into prosperity rather than into crime and other, I guess, maybe pathways that are less productive. It was kind of a for me growing up in West Lafayette, Indiana. Prior to that, I was in a suburb of Philadelphia when I was a little kid. I didn't necessarily get exposed to a whole lot in my youth, and it was as a young police officer, my eyes got opened a little bit.
Yeah, Patrick, growing up with my mom and dad, one of the things they really stressed is the importance of self-discipline. And that doesn't come naturally. We're not born with self-discipline. We're actually born pretty selfishly. And we want our food when we want it, and we want taken care of, and we don't, we're going to cry about it. So, my parents were very, very good for me in terms of teaching us that actions have consequences, the importance of self-discipline. I've kind of said it this way, and it sounds a little, maybe to some people, a little bit like a teacher would say it, but self-government or self-discipline is the first form of government. And so when you learn that from a young age, you really learn that, hey, if I do things properly, good things happen. If I do things improperly, I have natural consequences. Some children don't have the good fortune of having parents that teach them that, and that becomes where the community and churches and boys and girls clubs and those types of things become important. But I think it's to your point. That's how you can begin to affect generational change, is when these kids have these opportunities to learn self-discipline.
Yeah, absolutely. And the childhood that I have, I was definitely kept, within boundaries. And I always knew, like when I was a kid, you didn't worry about the police. You never worried about the police. You worried about mom and dad. And this was in the era before cell phones. And it's amazing to me how, like, my parents seemed to find out if I was up to no good. They would find out long before I ever got home. And there was no text messaging. There was no social media. It was just old school.
I agree,
communication.
Patrick. I mean, it was amazing how many times that my mom told me, be home by 5 for dinner. That's the rule. And by the time I got home, she found out the inappropriate or unseemly thing I did at the grocery store. I'm like, Mom, how did you know that? Like, at least could I just get home and be able to tell you myself before you found out from the neighbor? But that's what happens when you grow up in a town of 2,500 people.
Yeah, everybody knows everybody. And, small town America really has had a tough go the last 10, 20 years. And it's probably started even before that. But I read your book after we chatted, and I don't know, do you want to tell a little bit about the story of I'm going to say this, Van Wert, Ohio. Did I say it correctly?
Yes, you did.
Okay. Because I think that's really cool. Main Street in small town America is every bit as important as Main Street in metropolitan areas. In our state, Indianapolis is the largest metropolitan city. That's where state government is. That's where everything, that's kind of the center of the universe in Indiana. But not everyone grows up in big cities. I think that you were alluding to just a minute ago.
Yeah, so Van Wert, to give you this context, is my mom's hometown. So she grew up in Van Wert. My dad grew up in Auburn and Butler and around Indiana. They met at Moody Bible Institute in Chicago and then got married and then moved back to Butler and Auburn. So that was kind of their background. So Van Wert has a special place in my heart. My grandparents were lifelong Buckeyes. My grandpa passed away at 85. My grandma about the same age, but they were always in Van Wert and very, very rarely wanted to travel. And were Depression era kids, and so they were very frugal. And they taught me frugality, by the way.
Do they store their bread in the freezer?
Oh, all that. They used to take the plastic bags and turn them out and wash them and then dry them. I'm like,
my mom still to this day does that. And we, as much as we've tried to break her of it, it's like, Mom, we don't need to do that. She does it anyway.
We're getting a little bit down. But one of my funny stories with my grandpa was when he passed away, I was responsible to take care of the T-shirt drawer for some reason. And he had the thinnest T-shirt I've ever held in my hands and a package of brand new T-shirts underneath. And I'm thinking, Grandpa, what were you waiting on? But he always liked to have a little extra, right? Because they grew up with nothing. And so that's kind of the background. And so as you get involved in the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, you're using and seeing a lot of tools being used for the big cities. And if you think about it, a big city is a series of neighborhoods. And so these are really kind of small towns within a big city, but then they add up to be, a 2 million person metro. So as I'm thinking about this, Patrick, and I'm watching this, I'm thinking, man, of course, my heart's still back in Butler and Auburn. And I'm like, hey, wait a minute. If they're using these tools to fix these neighborhoods, the same tools that they're using to fix the neighborhoods, we should be able to fix our small towns with. And that was the sort of beginning of the idea. And the first town to call me when I had this idea was Van Wert, Ohio. So their situation was they had 116 buildings in their downtown that they thought were historically significant. Out of those 116, 16 were government and churches, so they were in pretty good shape. But out of 100 buildings that were left, 80 of them were falling down. And they had $100 million in their community foundation, and they made, following our program, they made the decision to put $3.5 million of that off of Wall Street into their Main Street fund, and we bought 52 of their 80 buildings in 18 months and are restoring those roughly 10 at a time until we completely restore the entire neighborhood, the entire city, the entire town. And then they're going and curating the restaurants, the retail, the entertainment venues so that they can basically reestablish what they had back in the 1950s and 60s.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's when you drive into a small town, whether it's in Indiana, whether it's in Ohio, Kentucky, since my retirement from policing last year, I have spent a lot of time in smaller towns, driving through smaller towns. And sometimes you see a lot of hope when you get into the right cities where you can tell people care, they invest, and then you can also go into other communities where there's a lot of despair. And I think when we look into the Rust Belt and areas like that where we see how hard they've been hit, when you lose major manufacturing, when jobs go away, and then you get issues with, what I dealt a lot with, with methamphetamine and then the opioid crisis, you can really kind of see how quickly things can spiral out of control. So maybe the question there, as you're taking this opportunity and making this run, thinking about small town America, one of the things that people oftentimes lose sight of is that safety and public safety are really one of your biggest economic drivers for any community. That if people don't feel safe and if there is high crime, then they're not going to relocate there. Or they're going to look for safety elsewhere, and generally that's going to be where they feel like there's opportunity. So, what's your thought on that as you go through this process? And I'm sure you've experienced this, as you did that work in Van Wert and maybe other places.
Yeah, when you look at the United States as an experiment, we've been at this since 1776 roughly, maybe a little before that if you count, the era of of migration from, around the world. But the United States has really been outrageously successful. And I've really deeply believe that that's because of our commitment to law and order. And we under like no country on earth are committed to law and order. And the proof of that is in Butler and Auburn, if I'm on a county road and there's a four-way stop, and I've often laughed at myself about this, everyone I know stops. Now, there's no one around for miles. There's not a single car. There's not a police officer. There's nothing. But we will stop at that stop sign because that stop sign says we're to stop. Now, I've gone to some foreign countries where they don't stop at anything. Like they have red lights and they just blow right through it, and it's chaos. And half the time you're wondering if you're going to even make it to the hotel. But in America, in the United States and in America where we live, we have a deep commitment in our roots to law and order. And that's kind of proven by the fact that as we migrated across the West, and remember, Indiana used to be the West back in the day. If you go to these towns, the first three things they built were churches. They built usually a beautiful courthouse, and then they also built an education center. Now, sometimes the church was both, but they often would build some education center, and then eventually, of course, Carnegie and others brought libraries and things like that. But we were deeply committed to churches, law and order, the courthouse, and then to make sure that we could educate our kids, even in the era where we were coming across on horse and buggy. So I think you look at that and you can understand why we're such a significant part of the world's GDP.
And with that in mind, I think the last couple years, America is getting a look at what life might be like without law and order. We're starting to see glimpses of lawlessness, and the scale at which people are seeing it, I think it's kind of scary. And in the post George Floyd era, in the months and quite frankly even the year after that, there's just been a big adjustment. So in policing itself, there's a lot that we can learn from how the last few years have gone. But I think the biggest lesson for everybody is when people don't feel safe, you've got problems.
Correct.
And that's but safety really it's kind of a nebulous thing, right? And as a chief, people used to always ask me all the time, like, how do you define success? How does a police chief define whether they're doing a good job or not? And I'm like, that's a great question, because if you ask chiefs, you're probably going to get a lot of different answers. And in the end, what we decided on is what we were just trying to identify is, look, if I send my wife or my daughter or one of my children wants to go to the grocery store at 10 o'clock at night, they should be able to jump in the car and go to the grocery store. And if they're doing that and I'm having the thought like, well, which store are they going to? And how long are they going to be there? If I don't feel like they're going to be safe, then as a police chief, then that's my responsibility. Like, we should feel safe to move freely about the city anytime, day or night, to be able to do what we need to do, whether it's for fun, work, or pleasure, whatever. And I think right now people are worried about what that looks like moving forward. And I think in downtown Indianapolis is a good example, and I'll just bring that up because I know that's one of the areas that you were talking about. Still have some boarded up businesses down there. There are businesses that are not just there, but all across the U.S. where the businesses are shutting down, they're leaving and they're going. And I was just following a conversation about this the other day. Like, what's going to replace that? What's coming in if there is no law and order? If people don't feel safe, what businesses? How do you revitalize a downtown where people don't feel safe?
Yeah, we saw. Can I start before we go to Indianapolis with
Sure.
Fort Wayne? And in 2001, we started having kids, and we had 4 kids in 4 years, 10 months. So we had a lot of kids quickly, and then we would. We won't comment on that, right, Patrick?
Well, I'm the youngest of 8, and my oldest sister is only 11 years older than me. So
you know what having a lot of kids quickly means. So we would take them down on Saturday downtown. And on Sunday, we would go to church, and people at church would say, hey, what did you guys do last night? And I said, well, we took our kids downtown. And they said, are you kidding me? That's not safe. Why would you do that? Now, this is like 2005 and 2006 in Fort Wayne. And I said, guys, it's completely safe. There's nobody there. And then they start laughing. But the perception in Fort Wayne was downtown wasn't safe. And I would talk to some of my friends who lived downtown, and I had friends in the police department, Fort Wayne Police Department, and they said there was a lot of petty crime downtown because it was crime of opportunity. Was we begin to transform Fort Wayne and begin to restore this downtown over the last 10 years, all that has dissipated. There's no, people are not afraid of downtown. They see downtown as vibrant, cool, safe, a place to go with your family. We see baby carriages everywhere downtown now. That's a good, healthy sign. Now you go to Indianapolis, and over the last 2 years as I've been on the road, I've heard a completely different story for 2 years. People telling me that we never go downtown anymore because we don't feel safe. That's the words they use. We don't feel safe. And people telling me that they moved from downtown because they don't feel safe. And you're right, Patrick. If you don't feel safe and you are not safe, then that can impact your entire community in a way that really can cause a lot of problems with economic development, with family development, with education, and a variety of other things that we deeply care about.
Yeah, and so maybe this conversation might be a little bit more specific for people that are in Indiana, but I think there's a lot that everybody can take away from this, because these are the discussions that are occurring all over America. It doesn't matter if it's Indianapolis or Minneapolis. They're having all kinds of issues up there. A lot of change, a lot of turnover in their police department and quite frankly, we're seeing that everywhere we go. So you proposed, I thought something that sounded pretty unique. I'm kind of curious to hear a little bit more about it, about what you're going to do if you were elected governor, about how you would create a safer downtown Indianapolis through partnerships. And I'm curious, number one, what are your thoughts on what are your ideas on that, and then two, maybe how has that been received? And I think probably you probably get mixed messages. I'm just making an assumption there, but
well, first of all, let's talk about what the problem we begin to see. We were educated by people who are in the entertainment and the convention business that we have 29 million visitors a year that come to Indianapolis, and where Hoosiers entertain them. We make a lot of state sales and income tax on those visitors, and they were concerned that would be at risk. Then we begin to look at the assets in downtown Indianapolis, and we as taxpayers across the state have put a lot of money in the convention center. We put a lot of money in Lucas Oil Field. We put a lot of money in the state capitol buildings and all the state buildings, and that's all within that capital zone. And we also saw a lot of potholes, and people like telling me, coming up and saying, look, I'm losing my tires, my front end. This is like, they use this term, this is like a hidden tax. It cost me like $1,000 to fix my car.
Yeah.
And then they were also telling me about several crimes that they either witnessed or happened to them within just walking from their hotel room to a meeting during the broad daylight.
Yep.
So this is the kind of feedback we're getting. And if it would have been one time, you could have maybe said, well, that was an aberration, but this began to happen over and over and over again. So as we begin to look at the cost to the state of Indiana for having a downtown Indianapolis where a lot of us go to a Colts game, we go to a Pacers game, we go to be entertained for some period of time. Many of my friends in Fort Wayne go down there for a weekend to shop or to be part of the energy of the center of our city, or to go to the State House, that it was just unacceptable that we not have safe streets and not have world-class infrastructure within our capital city. And so that was really the impetus of starting the Capital Zone idea, and then we had to meet with a lot of different leaders to make sure that we understood all the different issues. So it took us about a year for it to come out. But it really is about making sure that we have a safe capital city and that we have world-class infrastructure so that we can compete and even beat our other peer cities that we compete against every day for jobs, wages, growth, economics, and that type of thing.
Well, and I think no matter where you live in the U.S., you're probably familiar with Indianapolis, because if the head of the NCAA is down there, we host a lot of very big events. Super Bowl, NCAA championships. The Colts are there. a large convention center, conventions, I think like the International Firefighters Association, I think they have their annual conference there. So when you have people coming from all over the country, and we all do this, and people can say what they want, right? But you're making judgments all the time about where you are and how you feel. Anyone in any city, when you go someplace where you're not familiar, you're not comfortable with where you are, the first assessment that you're making is, do I feel safe? And what are some of the things that don't make us feel safe? Homelessness. When people are approached by people on the street, panhandlers, aggressive panhandlers, that in and of itself can lead to significant concerns about personal safety. And I've had a lot of conversations about this over the years because we get a lot of calls, in police departments about homelessness. And this is kind of maybe where we can kind of start steering the conversation more specifically towards policing, because that is a call for service. If someone calls the police and says, hey, there's someone that's panhandling, they're aggressive, they're making me not feel safe, well, that's a call. So the police department is going to send somebody there to check it out. And calls for service, they come in all day long, and depending on the type of environment that you're in, but Indianapolis is a very busy metropolitan area, and so that's going to require resources. And you need people to go handle those calls. And then when you get there, you have to be able to do something with it. And oftentimes the police, they get a little bit of a brunt of the frustration because people don't want to be accosted when they go to Walgreens or to McDonald's or wherever it is that they're going. And that's what's happening to them. And when they don't feel safe, they call the police. And when the police show up, if they don't do something, well, then they feel like the police don't care. And that's not necessarily the case. It's just, there's in many places, and I don't know if there's any place where being homeless is a crime. And I don't think there's anyone that would suggest that it should be a crime. But now the next step, the next question is, well, what do we do about that? And I think this goes to your point about having the right type of economic opportunity. If there's no jobs, or if you have high levels of mental illness, and you have a high level of a population that's on the street that doesn't make people feel safe, then people expect something to be done about it. And it's a huge issue, and I'm trying to make this thought succinct, but I'm already kind of rambling a bit. As from a police perspective, what can we do in government and really as a community to help tackle some of these ideas to not just make the problem go away, right? Because it's easy to take somebody and drive them somewhere else, or it's easy to shoo them into an area where they're not in the public eye, but that's not solving the problem. It's just displacing the problem, and it's prolonging an issue that's there, and that eventually that's just probably going to come back and bite you in the rear one way or another. So how do we address an issue like that?
Well, we think a lot about this, and here's a couple of thoughts, just sort of big picture. One is the importance and dignity of work. So work gives us dignity. I know for me, when I wake up and I'm trying to transform Van Wert, Ohio, I look forward every day to waking up and getting to work. And it gives me a sense of purpose, gives me a sense of dignity. So when you're without work, that could be a first step of a problem, because you lack the dignity of work. But another thing that we also know is that if you're addicted, if you have addiction issues, you're not likely to be able to work, and you're also struggling. So you're struggling with a lot of things, just health-wise. And so we have to have, I think, one of the things that leaders do is they're conveners. And bureaucracies, especially in government, will tell you two things. If you just give me more money and more people, we'll solve the problem. Well, we've seen in the United States that we put trillions of dollars into poverty, and what we've created is multi-generation of poverty within the same family. Putting more money at something doesn't always solve the problem. What you have to do is be innovative. And oftentimes, bureaucracies are not innovative. So what we're trying to do is partner with 501c3s, churches, people that are doing innovative things, helping people with addiction, kick addiction habits, helping them with mental health issues, and they're doing some really creative, innovative things with wraparound services that not only help them kick the addiction, but then get them into work right away so they get that dignity. And these are some of the creative things I think that we can do, Patrick. We're not going to solve every problem. One person is not going to change the life of 6.7 or 6.8 million Hoosiers. But when you put a team together around these issues, you can begin to address them. And then last, what I'll say is if you have a bold vision for your community like we did with Fort Wayne, where we begin to come in and say, we are not going to have broken windows. We are not going to have boarded up facilities. We did not let people riot in our streets. As soon as they started rioting, that was shut down. They had every opportunity to say their piece verbally. They could, march, they could talk, but as soon as they started throwing bricks through windows, that was over. They were stopped from doing that, arrested, whatever the case may be. We have to have that kind of approach, I think, even in downtown Indianapolis. And then if we do have a broken window, we fix it the next day. You don't wait months. One of the things that bothered me after the riots occurred is 10 months later, I was walking downtown and still seeing tons of, I couldn't even count how many boarded up windows I saw with plywood. Yeah,
I was surprised by that as well. And that is, we could talk a lot about that. Broken windows has gotten a lot of attention in the last few years from a policing perspective. There's, for those who may have not heard, broken windows theory is actually a policing theory that was put to work in primarily in New York City is where it really gained a lot of attention in the early 90s. And for all those reasons, right? Crimes of disorder got a lot of attention because crimes of disorder, low-level crimes that are eventually left, and the principle and the theory is that if a street light is out and there's no light in a dark area, then crime can gravitate towards that area. And even though that the levels of crime may be something that's minor or insignificant, that can eventually grow. And so areas where if you can shine a light, not just a street light, but the light of resources, then you can help keep those areas cleaned up and then prevent those problems from growing and getting worse. But what that requires is interaction between the police and those people that live in those communities, and that has caused conflict. And I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. Obviously, I'm coming from the police perspective, so we get into discussions about Terry stops and what that actually means. But I think sometimes we have a tendency to throw the baby out with the bathwater when we have something that maybe we disagree with. We just try to blow up the whole thing instead of just digging in to actually understand what are the problems that are occurring. And that's really what we've seen from a policing perspective for the last couple of years. These ideas that somehow policing is broken in America and it needs to be completely revamped. And the word that I hear a lot is reimagined. We need to reimagine policing. And I take a position that policing has never been better in America. Quite frankly, it hasn't. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of areas that we can improve upon. And so maybe that's a great segue for this conversation, is that if you in any endeavor, if you want to improve something, if you want to raise the level of professionalism, then you have to invest in it. Whether it's human resources, whether it's a capital infusion, training, all of these, education, all of these things are required. And we've seen a lot of that across America in policing today. There's a recruitment issue. There is a retention issue. We're just not getting people that are wanting to come into the profession. And with all of that external pressure, high levels of scrutiny, a demand for high levels of professionalism, no shortage of work, and then a very, very low tolerance for mistakes. And so that's kind of a big way of saying, what are your thoughts on the future of policing? I mean, from what you're getting as you're out on the road and you're talking with leaders around, what's your feel for it right now?
Well, first of all, I would start with this. I've a lot of friends that I've had in the police force, different levels, some state police, some local, some sheriffs. One of the things I would say consistently in my experience is that my friends have a big servant's heart. There are people that probably could have gone in a different path in life and maybe run businesses or done things that would have maybe even made them more money. But they chose this because they really wanted to serve people. And sometimes I think we underestimate, we kind of forget about the servant heart, because you focus on the one or two that did something they shouldn't have done instead of the millions that have a real servant's heart for people and really want to serve and make their community better. So that's one observation I've made of my friends that do that, that go into that profession. But also we know that as operators, and I'm an operator, I've operated a lot of things in my career, communities, businesses, you have to have the right tools. That's one of your jobs as a leader, is to make sure that you have the right tools. If you ask someone to do something with the wrong tools, it's unfair, and then you have to have the right training. Like I remember one time I was asked to do something pretty significant, and I had no idea where to even start because I had no they're just said, hey, you go, I don't even tell you what it was because you go fix this. And I'm like, I don't even know what to do here. And they just left, right? They didn't give me any training. They just said, go fix it. By the way, my kids know that if dad tries to fix something, it never goes well. So you have to have the right tools. You have to have the right training. And then you have to have the right resources. Asking me to go fix something when it costs $10,000 to fix and you give me $1,000, well, that's not, very reasonable, right? That's probably not going to be a good fix. So you have to have the right tools, the right training, the right resources, and then there has to be accountability. You might give someone the right tools, training, and resources, but if you don't hold them accountable, sometimes they use the resources for other things. So those are the things that we have to make sure as a society we do with the people that serve us. And that's one of the things we're going to be deeply committed to, and to make sure that beyond that, then we thank them. We're grateful for what they do so that we can feel safe and be safe within our communities. And I think when we begin to do that again in our society, we're going to find more and more people that are willing to join and serve.
I like to make the joke. It's cops, teachers, and coaches, and I'm sure this applies to a lot of other professions as well. But generally speaking, those are the three professions that people haven't done that always think that they can do better. I played high school football, so when I sit on the sidelines and I watch my son's high school football game, that I should know, why isn't the coach calling this play? Or, I've watched Blue Bloods, so I know the police should be doing this. CSI, ask any cop about CSI.
Well, Patrick, every Sunday I watch NFL football, I'm questioning whether the coach knows what they're doing. We all do that, right? We're always quite like, well, why didn't the coach call that play? So we do have a habit of sometimes, thinking that we could do better than somebody else, regardless of what it is, right? Sports or whatever the case may be. Yeah,
and my point of bringing that up is I'm guilty of it just like anybody else is, right? I've got my favorite teams and I have my questions, but when it does come to policing, that's obviously near and dear to my heart. So over the last few years, we've seen a lot of people from the outside make judgments about what police officers are doing and why without a fundamental understanding of the process that goes on behind it. And when we talk about what you said, giving people the right resources, I think in Indiana we do a really good job. And people, it's a very complex environment in that you have a main centralized academy for most of Indiana. The state police has their own academy. And then our large metropolitans, like where you live here in Fort Wayne, they have an academy. The Indianapolis Metro Department has an academy. And then we have a couple satellite academies up in Northwest Indiana and down in Southwest Indiana. All of those run under the umbrella of the Indiana Law Enforcement Academy and the Law Enforcement Training Board, which I was fortunate enough to serve on that for a few years. And that's where I really got a really good understanding and a true appreciation for the challenge that they face. And the resources there, quite frankly, over the last couple decades have really been lacking. And just a couple of years ago, as one of the positives that came out of some of the the defund the police movement and some of the scrutiny we're facing is a big capital investment into the academy. But, if I'm being frank, right now it's kind of like a Band-Aid on an arterial bleed because it's been neglected for so long. The capital infusion is good, but maybe the question for you is, coming from your business background and your expertise and being able to, if we can revitalize a downtown that was crumbling, maybe we can do the same thing for our police academies and our police training and just policing overall. How do we invest as a state in making sure that we're attracting the best possible talent, and then we're giving them the best training that we can give them, and then the training and the equipment and the technology to go out and do the things that we need to keep our community safe, whether it's Auburn, Butler, Lafayette, Fort Wayne, Indianapolis.
Yeah, I think one of the things that the best qualities of leaders that I've seen are when leaders have a curious mind. That's one of the best qualities of a leader that I've seen when they're a great leader. If you have a curious mind, that means you're going to bring people that know more about a topic than you do into a room. And what I love to do is get about 10 or 12 of them. You get too many more and it becomes a gaggle. But you get about 10 or 12 of them in the room, and you inspire through your questions healthy debate. So you want to hear from every perspective, and if you really have a curious mind that can and ask good questions, you get a more well-rounded perspective, and then ultimately leads to a better answer. And then the other thing is, sometimes you just have to act, because what you have to do is act and then adjust. Act and then adjust, because nothing is ever going to be perfect. But you have to do those things in order for you to make progress. And so I think that's something we're going to need to do with training is, let's get the right people in the room around the table, have a good, healthy debate discussion about it, and then pick a strategy and then adjust that strategy to keep it going in a better way. And there's a lot of topics that need to have that, right. But certainly this is one of them.
Well, policing is interesting. In Indiana, our academy, the basic training, it's right around 500 hours to be a certified police officer. And I think to be a licensed cosmetologist, it's like 1,500 hours. And so when people hear that kind of perspective, they're like, oh my gosh, like my hairdresser has more training than my local police officer. And it's like, well, what we're talking about is being able to train, and this is what sometimes people fail to understand, is when we send officers to an academy, that is a centralized location where we're going to give them the training to become a base level proficient police officer, because not every community is resourced the same, because they could be going back, they could be, and this is, 80% of police departments in America are under 50 officers, and most of them are even smaller than that. Like I think it's close to 50% of police departments have less than 10 officers. So if you're in a small community with no resources, you might actually get hired, and this is true in Indiana, you could get hired today, go through a 40-hour class next week, and then the week after that, you could be carrying a gun, being out on the street. And when you hear things like that, that sounds kind of scary, right? That's not a lot of training. That's a lot of responsibility with not a lot of preparation. Now, fortunately, most, that's a rarity, and most police departments have in-house training, and it's an apprenticeship program that goes along with that training. But it does require time, and it requires effort, and it requires resources. So there are big disparities in how police officers are trained from one department to another. So at the academy level, if we have this capital infusion, and we can build really high quality, state-of-the-art facilities where we can start to train, and now we can develop some long-term funding mechanisms, then I think what we can do as a state is really, really launch our police, the future of policing, into the stratosphere, so to speak. I mean, I like to think big too. And that's kind of exciting when you think about stuff like that. But I think until something like that happens, we're always kind of police training. It's not a problem until it's a problem. And then when a problem happens, then the questions get asked, right?
That's right.
You hop on a mini sub and you go a couple thousand feet below the surface of the water, and it's not a problem until it's a problem. And then afterwards, we kind of look and say, well, we should have known this was a problem. And some people did, but they just didn't act, right? So I like what you said there. You ever heard the expression "fire, ready, aim"?
Yes. Some people maybe accuse me from time to time of that, but the thing I do believe is that kind of like flying a plane, right? You have to adjust the dials. You don't just like get up in the air and set the course. I mean, you have to continue to look at the dials and adjust them. I remember when we did Regional Cities Initiative for the first time. I'm not sure if I probably should play this much inside baseball, but I'm going to, because it was really a funny conversation. The budget director for the state of Indiana called me in and said, hey, we're going to put this $126 million into regional cities, and I just want to understand everything that's going to happen here to make this work. And I looked at him and I smiled and I said, Chris, we're going to jump off the cliff and build the plane while we're going down, and we're going to figure it out as we go. And he goes, what? He goes, in all my days of being in the budget, I've never even, that's crazy. And I was like, but Chris, that's the way this is going to work, because we can't predict. All the lights are not going to be green from here to Chicago. You're going to have to figure it out as we go. And that was, he never did. He told me later, like a year later, he goes, I've never forgotten that conversation when he told me we just had to jump off and figure it out before we hit the ground. But sometimes that's what you have to do as a leader, is you have to try to figure it out while you're acting, and that's the only way you can make progress.
So the other aspect of the is in attracting and training, preparing the best police officers we can find. We also have to support them, and we have to understand that we're asking them to do a very difficult job. One of the conversations that's come up nationally the last couple of years, and it was brought up again here recently, is about qualified immunity. I think you've got a pretty good understanding, but maybe for those that are listening, I mean, what's your take on qualified immunity, and do you think it's important for police officers?
Yeah, I think it's critical to keep qualified immunity, and I try to explain it in simple terms this way. If you're a police officer acting in good faith to do your job, and in the course of doing that job, do something that ended up in hindsight not being the right thing to do. For example, you should have not gone in and looked in the trunk, or whatever. You have a qualified immunity. You cannot be personally, your family cannot be personally sued or liable for that. Now, what qualified immunity doesn't count or doesn't apply to is if you do something illegal. Everyone knows that if you do something illegal, you have to follow the same rules, and you're required to follow the same laws that everyone else is. You can't just go out. Qualified immunity is not full immunity. It's qualified, meaning that you acted in good faith. And nobody should do their job acting in good faith and then have their family financially ruined because somebody sued them for acting in good faith. And that's why I think it's important to make sure that we protect qualified immunity.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. We were pretty outspoken from the Indiana Chiefs Association, and I know the other state organizations. The way I try to explain it to people, it's like you can't change the rules in the middle of the game and then hold somebody accountable for not knowing what the rules are.
Yeah,
and
another good way to explain it.
The qualified immunity that police officers have is for just what I think you explained it very well, in that if an officer makes a mistake, but if they make the mistake out of malice and through criminal activity, then they can be held accountable. Qualified immunity doesn't provide any protection. They can be held accountable and will be held accountable, not just criminally, but also civilly. So all of the penalties that they could face, they will. But if you have an officer that is acting in good faith, that at the time that they do something, they believe they're doing the right thing. And here's the simple way to put it: like the Rayshard Brooks case was a perfect example in Atlanta, because qualified immunity gets brought up after a lot of controversial police use of force cases. And what people don't realize is that, police officers are under significant amount of pressure in a time compressed moment to make a decision that could cost them their life, or it could cost a citizen their life if they don't act appropriately. And police and citizens have about, I think the last time I was looking at it, was like 46 million contacts a year. And, of those that wind up, there's a very small percentage of those cases that actually involve any level of force. And then those that involve the level of deadly force, where officers, where shootings are involved, where suspects are injured or killed, is basically around 1,000 cases a year. And it's, when you look at the data, from that 50,000 foot view, you really, this is where I go back to saying, it's amazing how well we do the job. It's not to say that there aren't a few cases here and there where where officers need to be held accountable because either gross negligence or just malintent. But those cases are few and far between. And the danger in removing qualified immunity is just like you said. It's like you're asking an officer to go out and make those types of decisions and not have there's no safety net. And I don't know that anyone would want to do a job like that. And particularly when the people that are making the laws are protected by full immunity.
Correct.
So there's a hypocrisy there. It's like, well, how can you can do whatever you want, but you're gonna ask me to be second guessed under very, very split second decisions. And so that's where I think there was a lot of frustration from police departments, and we're seeing, it'll be interesting to see long term. It's kind of, some of the municipalities in the country that have gone away and they've changed their rules around qualified immunity. They've been experiencing police officers leave. So it'll be interesting to see how that affects policing long term.
Well, Patrick, the other thing I've really tried to learn in my career, and I'm 53 now, so I've had a few years to try to learn, these things. But one of the things that's important when you're a leader in crisis is to remain calm. And to the concept of due process in our law, which I really appreciate, is the fact that if somebody accuses me of doing something either criminally illegal or even civilly illegal, there's a deliberative process with which there's investigations, and it has to be proven in a court of law with due process. It's not snap. It's not might makes right, or because I'm more powerful than you, I get to, say I'm right, you're wrong. There's due process. And sometimes that due process can feel painfully slow. But when I've been accused of doing something that I didn't do, I'm really grateful that there's due process, right? And my friends are too, by the way. If I did do something, then I need to be held accountable for that. And even if it takes longer than it should to be held accountable, there needs to be accountability. I would rather err on the side of a deliberative process that gives the people the right to defend themselves from the accusation a little longer than maybe we'd want it to take, than err on the snap decision of, well, we think you did this without much investigation. We're going to punish you for that, whatever it is that you did. Yeah.
And I had a saying that I used to tell community members when they would be frustrated about maybe they feel like there's inaction on the police department, or it's taking too long, the prosecutor's taking too long, whatever that might be. But I always say, the wheels of justice turn. They just turn at their own pace. And it's generally a lot slower than anybody wants. And that's a good thing, because if that starts moving too fast, then things get missed. And in the Rayshard Brooks case is a perfect example. There were people publicly making claims that the officers there were wrong, that they shouldn't have used deadly force in that case. And as it turns out, as we let the process work that's been working for the last 100 years, letting things move through the court system, letting case law and state law and everything dictate how that's going to play out, the officers were ultimately, there was no charges filed against them because they couldn't, right? They did exactly, I think, what most normal human beings would expect that you would do if you were faced with the fear of being assaulted with deadly force, or you run a risk of being killed for just going out and doing your job. And so it's another good example of why I think people it's important to pay attention, but it's also important to let the process play out.
Well, Patrick, I've seen this as a father. Your kid comes in and says XYZ happened, and you have a tendency as a father to make a snap decision about, well, how did XYZ happen? And you already are kind of accusing, and I've done this a couple times, maybe just 3, Patrick. I'm not sure more than that. And so then you start asking your kid more questions. Well, what led to that and what made that happen? And by the time you get more of the story, all of a sudden as a father, you're realizing that I might have overreacted. And all of a sudden you have a different perspective of why your child did what they did, and suddenly you're not in the frame of mind to punish them in the same way that maybe you would have been when they first said XYZ happened. This happens in all life. And that's what due process does, is it allows the more full story to come out so that people can make an informed decision about what they really think should happen, whether it's punishment or they are exonerated. And I've always been amazed at how just a couple things that changed in the story changed my perspective.
All right. So while we're on this subject real quick, speaking of prosecutors, some of the frustration that police officers will have at times is they feel like sometimes the criminal justice system can be a revolving door system, and you arrest somebody, you take them to jail, and before you're even back to the state, before you've even written your report, they're back out on the street, and we're arresting them again, or they're getting into trouble again. There's a lot of cases out there right now where we're starting to see that this is becoming problematic, and it is, and I have, a part of me, I think, understands the pressure that prosecutors' offices can be under, that just the amount of just the weight of the system and the sheer volume of cases that come through, especially in large metropolitan areas. But there's also a part of me that gets really frustrated when we have rules, and like I mentioned it before, right? You can't change the rules in the middle of the game and then expect it to come out fairly. You got any? I know that was something that you mentioned in part of your plan for Indianapolis, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there needs to be a real collaboration between the prosecutors and the police, General Assembly, and the governor. Obviously, the General Assembly makes laws. Governor does not, but the governor has an influence over some of what could be passed, and obviously could veto it. But we also know we have a weak governor system, and those vetoes are frequently overridden. So it's got to be a collaborative effort. We've actually suggested in Indianapolis that there be a prosecutorial review board that would review some of these situations, because there have been times where people that have done very dangerous, committed or potentially committed very dangerous crimes got out very quickly with low bonds, and then they committed even more dangerous and sometimes life-threatening crime. And so, look, as leaders, we all should crave accountability. We should not be afraid of accountability or afraid of being questioned. Our judgment's not perfect. We're human. And so this review board could be, I think, a good process for accountability, just to make sure that we saw things correctly, that we're doing them correctly. And then I think within the context of the law, to make sure that we have the right laws in place to make sure that we don't have an easy way for violent or potentially violent criminals to get back out in the streets without effectively there's kind of a due process here too, right?
Right. Yeah.
There should be some deliberation. If someone committed a violent crime, there should be some deliberation, some cooling off period before they're allowed to just come back out and then maybe do an even more violent crime.
Yeah. And the police departments in Indiana, we have what they call merit laws, merit rules, and they establish these civilian review boards. And I think of a process very similar to that. So there is a check and there is a balance, that you have these members that are made up of your communities that sit on these review boards. And a lot of people in Indiana don't realize that, as a chief of police, I didn't hire people and I didn't fire people. I made recommendations for hiring and I made recommendations for discipline and for termination. But it's our civilian review board that actually makes those decisions, and that is a good check and balance. For and I think the more people understand, how the sausage gets made, the more confidence they actually have in the system. But it is a little bit, I think, frustrating for people to realize that we can go through the legislative process, we can create laws, and then on the policing side, we can go out and we can arrest dangerous criminals, and then one person can make a determination about whether they go to jail or not. And another myth that gets perpetuated a lot is, oh, we've got people that are sitting in jail for smoking a joint, or they're going to prison, they're doing hard time for marijuana. And there are people that are getting arrested for what might be viewed as a low-level drug offense, but people aren't going to prison for things like that. If people realize how hard it was to get someone actually into prison in the first place, they would be a little bit concerned about how easy and maybe flippant sometimes we don't hold them accountable. So I'll be keeping an eye on that. It'll be interesting to watch to see how those conversations go in the future. But I know these conversations go really quick for me, and I want to be respectful of your time. But there's a couple other things I wanted to touch on. One in particular, that a subject that's near and dear to my heart, and that the reason this podcast is called the Coptimizer Podcast is because we talk about cop optimization. Officer safety and wellness is I've spent a lot of time working in that area. Indiana is not a presumptive benefit state, and for those that don't know what presumptive benefit states are, it's ultimately for people that work in public safety. If you work in a job that's very high risk, then there are rules that are in place, OSHA rules and other things that can provide assistance to those workers. Cardiovascular disease is the number one killer of cops. It's not even close. I know we tend to focus on things like ambush and officers getting killed in the line of duty, which are very important that we need to focus on. But the well-being of police officers, because they're working shift work, they're working very high stressful environments, the health is not very good. And I don't know if this is something that's even on your radar yet, but I just wanted to put it on your radar while we were chatting about this. 37 of the 50 states, last I checked, were presumptive benefit states. Indiana is not one of them. And if we were, then if an officer were to have, in the way that it's set up, and I think Nevada runs this way, if you're on the job for more than 5 years and you have a medical related issue, such as a heart attack, that can be associated with your profession, then there are benefits that come to you that the cost and the treatment that doesn't come out of pocket. And it's a good thing because it provides protection for the officers, but it's also a good thing because it provides skin in the game for everybody. And if we can do that, then because also one of the things that I get a little concerned about is that we don't have physical fitness standards in policing. You have to meet a certain criteria to be able to graduate from the academy and get certified as an officer. But after that, very few agencies have requirements, and sometimes that can lead to poor health, and that which also can lead to poor performance. So it's probably a much bigger topic than for right now. And I'll shut up with that. But is that something that you've ever heard about, or is that something you've thought about?
No, you're representing what I love about this journey we've been on for the last 2 years. You learn something new every day. And so that's been very fascinating. I've not heard some of those stats, and so that's something I will really enjoy learning more about. But I think it goes to the broader issue of, governing 6.8 million people has a lot of challenges.
Yep.
And one person cannot be a subject matter expert on, 30 agencies. And that's how many agencies we have, and there's all these verticals within the agency. So This is where humility kind of comes in. You have to surround yourself with really gifted people who can educate you and bring to you information, and then you have to also then empower people to go, really solve some of these challenging issues. So I think this is a good example, Patrick, of what's happened over the last 2 years. A lot of our ideas like zero cost adoption came out of people coming to me with, we have a challenge and a problem here. How could we solve it? When we adopt a child and it costs $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 for the aftercare. Well, we don't want to put families in distress when they've adopted children and are loving on them. So that's kind of some of the things that came with zero cost adoption. Or, when you look at the teacher investment program, we have a teacher crisis. And then you're pointing out, this situation. This is what we hope voters continue to do with us, and what we hope people around the state continue to do is give us feedback as the things that need to be improved, so that as we empower, leaders across government, state government, and even local government, we can begin to address some of these issues.
That's awesome. And, along those lines, one other topic, I certainly appreciate that, because everybody wants what they want, right? We could go back to having discussions about kids right here. We can link it to that, but I won't go there. But, every year come Christmas time, kids always have a list, right? And, we're always looking to Santa, and sometimes we have as residents of a state, we might look towards state government as Santa Claus. But, Santa Claus is in reality, when we're coming to, divvying up the resources that we do have in policing in Indiana. I have experienced this personally now, because I am now a recent retiree. I am a member of the PERF fund. And as a retiree, I was the chief for 10 years, but my pension is based on a patrolman first class salary. And I don't necessarily have a huge issue with that, because I like the fact that we're trying to protect the solvency of the pension fund, to always ensure that the money's going to be there for everybody, regardless of what job and what role you did, because the patrolmen are the ones that are carrying the load out on the street. They're doing the hard work. But when you're looking at the professionalism of policing, and you want to incentivize to get your best people into the positions of supervision and leadership, then you have to incentivize it the right way. So we can do that at the local level with pay, but in the policing world, a lot of people don't realize this when I tell them. They just assume that, oh, you're a retired chief, you can just retire and go do whatever you want now. And it's like, well, that would be great. Not necessarily true. So the crux of it is how do we invest in our pension system to be able to, for police and fire, to make it maybe match what we see in teachers and other unions, where officers can, their percentage is based on their top 3 years of salary. Because here's why it's a problem. If I'm a patrol officer and I have a ton of responsibility, I have a very important job to do, and now you're going to ask me to be a sergeant and be a supervisor. Now, not only do I have to worry about what I'm doing, but I also have to worry about what others are doing. And then you can extrapolate that out through the chain of command in police departments. What's the incentive then if pay differential isn't that great? How do we get people to want to engage in these leadership positions where they're going to take on that extra responsibility, so we can elevate the profession? If in 10 years, it's like, man, I could have just worried about myself, just kept my nose to the grindstone, and when I retire, I wouldn't have all these worries. So I don't know if you've given any thought to that, but there's another thing I'm going to put on your radar for you.
All right. Duly noted. Duly noted. And I think, again, this is the kind of great discussions. I think when you get the right people in the room, you could begin to tackle some of these issues and figure out creative solutions. I know one of the concerns that has been shared with me is a lot of police officers do after-hour work, and in that process they get paid, and in that process they put money into the federal tax withholding.
Okay.
I forget, it's slipping me, but
yeah,
Social Security.
Yeah.
Basically.
So in Indiana, we actually, we don't pay into Social Security if you're a member of PERF. So we don't. So when you work side jobs,
you do. Yeah. And as I understand it, they're concerned, and you can help me with the technical term, but they work this side job and make, let's say, $10,000 a year, and they pay into Social Security, but then when they retire, they're not allowed to collect what they paid into the system. And I think there's a technical term for that that's slipping my mind at the moment.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. But I do think that you are eligible for Social Security if you qualify with enough points for Social Security. I'm not an expert in that, so I've got myself a little homework assignment that I'm going to have to do.
Well, this is one of the concerns people have shared with me, that, of course, this is a federal issue with the federal delegation, but it's something to keep an eye on. Is, these are the creative solutions that we could maybe come up with that would make it easier for people to retire and easier for people to have the benefits they need to have a successful life during retirement. So I think these all things are things that we can discuss and be a part of a journey together as we try to figure it out.
And that's great because, Indiana, when it comes to when you look at police officer pay and you look at surrounding states and some of the benefits, there are no health benefits that come with that pension either. So generally, officers, when they do retire, and I think it's good to have a system where because policing, especially policing on the street, is a young person's job. And when you get, and I'm in my mid 50s, so I can say this from a personal perspective, and I work very hard to stay in shape, and I feel like, that was always one of my goals. Like, I could go work the street any day if I needed to. But I don't necessarily know that we want people working in a patrol role at 62 or 65. And I think that's why police pensions were set up the way that they were, is to incentivize that, we can move people through the system in an efficient way, and then, have them retire at an age where they can still retire. And the problem is, I think we are creating an environment where if we don't have another career to move on to, or we don't have a spouse that somebody has insurance, then we really are kind of, you're kind of in a trick bag. So it is definitely something that I think deserves some close attention to and some scrutiny about how we can incentivize for a lot of different reasons. One, we want to elevate performance, and we want to do that in a way that we're respectful for officers' health and well-being, and for that of their families, and then also be able to retire them in a way that they're healthy also. Hire healthy, retire healthy, be prosperous, and hopefully live a long, healthy life in retirement, and be able to see their grandkids. But the national data is not good on retirement for police officers. The longevity for police officers, the average lifespan is anywhere from 18 to 24 years below the national average. And like I mentioned before, cardiovascular disease rates like 18 times that of the general population. So we've got a lot of work to do. And I'm looking forward to maybe hearing more of your ideas and your solutions about how we can do that, how we can get creative, and maybe how we aim, fire, ready.
Well, I want to sort of end, this from my perspective on this note. We are very grateful as a family for the service that people, whether it's our police, our fire, we go to sleep at night feeling very comfortable that we, in fact, at least in my community, we feel safe and we are safe, and we're very grateful because not very many jobs do you wake up every day with the notion that if I go fight this fire, I could get killed. If I go do my job as a police officer, I'm putting my life on the line, and most of us know that things can happen, but we don't wake up every day going to a job where we're protecting people and serving them. And so we're just very grateful for what the police community does for us. We know that we are able to run successful businesses because of our commitment to law and order and how we enforce it. And we are very grateful that when we make the phone call that they show up and they help us. And we also understand that, we need to make sure that we are all accountable, right, for making sure that we do the best job we can every day. Amen. I'm just wanting to express gratitude for you, Patrick, and for the people like you who have served. We're very grateful for that, and I think that's an important part of gratitude. To me, is an important part of the human experience. What I see when people start to struggle is when they lack gratitude. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This has been a very enjoyable conversation. I'm looking forward to seeing how things go as we roll through the summer and into this fall. No shortage of things to work on, right?
No shortage.
Not just on the policing side, but we're looking at, that's where I'm coming from in my perspective. But I'm also a Hoosier myself, and I want the best for Indiana, and I'm also a little bit competitive, so I like to win. I like for Indiana to set the bar and show the rest of the country about what we can do, and great leadership is where it's at. So thanks again for spending some of your valuable time with us. You live in a great community, and I can speak to this. You've got a great police department here. You've got great leadership, and I know a lot of Fort Wayne officers and their chief and their deputy chief and good folks up here. So you're in good hands up here in Fort Wayne. And
we are. Thank you. Thank you, Patrick.
Well, thanks everybody for listening. Until our next episode, we'll be 1042.